Local police believed they were detaining an unremarkable, aging black gentleman. However, when federal operatives showed up merely half an hour afterward, the entire situation transformed. This tale isn't simply about an elderly individual. It's the story of a commitment that endured 50 years, a duty nobody realized was still active. Before we dive in, tell us your location in the comments below. And make sure to hit that subscribe button because we have something extraordinary planned for tomorrow's episode. Rain had returned to Blanket Greenwood as daylight faded behind thick storm clouds, painting everything in silvery hues across the weathered pavement and swaying lampposts. The community appeared weary, resembling a well-worn novel left outside too long, recognizable, dog-eared, and resistant to transformation. For most Greenwood residents, Elijah Brooks existed as barely more than a ghost. His name escaped their memory, though his face remained vaguely familiar. Typically seen driving his battered Dodge truck or seated quietly on his front porch, clutching coffee with an expression so motionless it could have been sculpted from granite. At 82, this veteran and widower had laid too many to rest while saying far too little. Neighbors walked past without pausing, not from rudeness, but because they believed he valued his solitude. He avoided community gatherings, never voiced opinions at the local barbershop, and never once requested assistance, even after a minor stroke weakened his right side. He simply adapted. Tonight, however, Elijah Brooks wasn't resting. He was moving with purpose. His movements were calculated and deliberate as he approached the pickup. Resting on the passenger seat was a weathered metal container, secured and locked, bound with ancient leather, so fragile it appeared ready to crumble. It had remained hidden in his closet's depths for more than 50 years. Tonight marked its moment. The truck sputtered reluctantly to life. Elijah straightened his cap and merged onto the roadway, his vision keen despite his advanced age. The route was one he'd traveled countless times before, yet tonight felt distinctly different. The burden beside him transcended mere metal. It carried memory and mission. 10 miles beyond town limits, crimson and azure lights flickered through the fog. A sobriety checkpoint awaited. Elijah decreased his speed, not from anxiety. He harbored no secrets, but with practiced resignation. Such encounters had become routine. In Greenwood, certain prejudices persisted. An African-American man driving, at night in an aged vehicle, invariably drew suspicious glances, particularly when he didn't offer ready smiles. A young patrolman approached, his uniform darkened by moisture. "License and registration, please." Elijah complied wordlessly. The officer's flashlight surveyed the truck's interior, lingering on the container. "What's inside the case?" Elijah met his gaze directly. "That's not your concern." The officer tensed. "Sir, I need you to exit the vehicle." He emerged slowly, offering no resistance. When questioned again about the box's contents, Elijah's tone deepened. "It belongs to the Bureau. That's all you require to know." His words didn't sit well. Additional officers arrived, first one, then another. Despite showing no aggressive behavior, Elijah found himself in handcuffs. They confiscated the box. The rainfall intensified. In the patrol car's rear seat, Elijah remained composed and silent, his jacket damp, boots leaving faint marks on the rubber matting. He observed the blurred building shapes sliding past through rain-streaked windows as they headed toward the precinct. No protests, no explanations. He had anticipated this outcome and prepared accordingly. At the station, they processed him like any other detainee. Fingerprints taken, photographs snapped, the metal container logged as miscellaneous personal effects. Someone joked it probably contained old military decorations or dead batteries. Elijah remained silent. They placed him in a holding cell. Bare concrete walls, metal bench, flickering surveillance camera overhead. He sat with identical quiet composure he displayed each morning on his porch. The box had vanished from sight, though not from mind. Meanwhile, in the main office, the arresting officer input Elijah's identification into their system. The monitor blinked, then went dark. A new message appeared. "Secure the individual and item. Await federal response. Do not proceed with questioning. The officer leaned back, bewildered. He summoned the sergeant over. They attempted the search again. Identical message appeared, now accompanied by a timer. Estimated response arrival: 27 minutes. Silence filled the room. No more jokes or chuckling. The sergeant instructed the evidence clerk to place the box in a separate, secure locker. Nobody was permitted to handle it or attempt opening it. In the detention area, Elijah hadn't shifted position. An officer placed a water bottle just inside the door. Elijah acknowledged it with a single nod, maintaining his silence. Younger officers began whispering among themselves. Speculation spread through corners. He mentioned it's federal business. What could that possibly mean? He's got some kind of security clearance. Didn't even flinch when I cuffed him. The sergeant positioned himself by the front window, watching mist transform into gentle drizzle. 3 decades of service in this town had shown him protests, fires, and shootings. But never this. Never federal intervention with warnings that sounded like Cold War thriller material. When the black SUVs entered the parking area, they arrived without sound. No sirens, no radio chatter, just commanding presence. 6 identical vehicles, all with tinted windows, remaining perfectly still. Momentarily before doors opened simultaneously, then they emerged. Dark suits, composed expressions, quiet authority, and the unmistakable sense that everything had fundamentally shifted. Inside his cell, Elijah finally relaxed his shoulders, posture remaining straight, eyes forward. He didn't smile, but within. His stillness lay the suggestion of someone who had spent his entire life waiting for this precise moment. The station door opened with precision's whisper. Agent Monica Hughes entered first, her steps measured, her expression unreadable behind. Rain-dotted glasses. Tall, mid-40s, African-American, dressed in a tailored dark overcoat with an expression refined through years of navigating systems not designed for her success. 2 additional agents followed, moving not with intimidation but practiced authority. They required no drawn weapons to command respect. They wielded a different power, the kind that arrived only when decisions had been finalized elsewhere. Sergeant Hayes stepped forward, curiosity and concern etching deeper lines across his already weathered features. She identified herself efficiently, displaying credentials with a gloved hand. "We are here for the individual you detained tonight, Elijah Brooks, and the item accompanying him." No pleasantries, no casual conversation, just facts delivered with federal breath against local procedure. He guided her down the corridor and, though younger officers attempted to conceal their staring, they couldn't resist. This wasn't standard protocol. This wasn't paperwork and midnight coffee. This represented something beyond their comprehension. Inside the holding area, Elijah stood immediately when the key turned. No instruction was necessary. He regarded Monica with quiet recognition. Though they'd never met, understanding passed between them. You could observe it in how her posture shifted slightly in acknowledgement. She didn't extend her hand, simply nodded. "Mr. Brooks," she stated, "we're prepared." The sergeant stepped aside as the door closed behind them. Nobody overheard their brief exchange. It didn't last long, but when the door reopened, her words rang clear and final. "Release him immediately. He is not under arrest. He is to be treated as a federally protected individual. There will be no additional questioning." Hayes blinked. Protected? Monica met his eyes. Yes, and more importantly, respected. They relocated him from the holding room to the briefing area where lighting was warmer and coffee didn't taste like rainwater. Someone offered him a towel. He dried his face but left everything else as it was, damp, worn, but standing upright. They provided a chair and coffee. This time Elijah accepted, holding the cup with both hands, not for warmth, but for grounding. As agents moved through the evidence room, gloves on, scanners active, heavy silence settled across the station. Nobody knew what to say, so nobody attempted conversation. The metal container was retrieved, carried carefully like a sacred artifact. Agent Hughes used a device on the latch, and when it clicked open, she remained composed. Inside, folders aged by decades, manila envelopes sealed with wax, black and white photographs folded in thirds, a USB drive sealed in foam packaging, and, at the very bottom, a flat black object no larger than a paperback novel with a serial number barely visible on its surface. Monica studied it for an extended moment before whispering to another agent. He disappeared down the hallway, phone in hand. Sergeant Hayes, standing nearby, broke his silence. "What is all that?" Monica hesitated, then answered carefully. "It's the past, buried and secured. And this man," she gestured toward Elijah, "has protected it better than most vaults ever could." She indicated the conference room. "May we use that space?" He nodded agreement. In the room they arranged the items, not to expose them to everyone, but to verify something. Elijah sat at the table, the opened box beside him, his expression calm. Hayes and the few officers permitted inside remained near the walls, hands still, eyes wide. Monica stood at the table's head and addressed the room. Elijah Brooks served in the United States Army during Vietnam. What was never made public, what was never permitted to be recorded in any civilian-facing documentation, is that he was subsequently recruited into a Cold War intelligence unit operating outside traditional military frameworks. This unit, she continued, her voice steady, was established by joint authorization of the Pentagon and Department of Intelligence. Their purpose: intercept, preserve, and protect information deemed too sensitive for conventional intelligence operations. Most of their missions remain classified, but one, codenamed Project Ember Watch, ended in apparent failure. The final mission collapsed under diplomatic pressure. The operation was buried, personnel reassigned or forgotten, except for one man who retained the final archive by agreement, by oath. Mr. Brooks was entrusted with a cache of materials, not to be opened, not to be revealed unless and until protocol clearance was restored. That clearance was quietly restored 3 weeks ago, and he chose tonight as the moment to fulfill that promise. Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody questioned why. Because in that instant, they understood this wasn't about stolen property or suspicious activity. This was about a man who had carried something for 50 years without seeking recognition, without speaking out, without ever allowing pride to overshadow duty. One officer, the young one who had initially inquired about the box, stepped forward. "I didn't know." His voice cracked, not from guilt alone, but something deeper. Shame. Elijah looked at him, not unkindly. He didn't speak, but his eyes softened. The officer nodded, a quiet apology passing between men of different generations, different Americas. Monica turned to Hayes. "We'll be taking the materials, and Mr. Brooks with us tonight, but I want to thank you for not escalating what could have become far worse." Hayes cleared his throat. "We almost did." She nodded. "But you didn't." As agents prepared to depart, Elijah rose, his knees stiff, but his back still straight. Monica offered him her coat. He declined, gently. "I've weathered worse," he said with a slight smile. Outside, the SUVs waited, engines running, lights dimmed. Rain tapped soft rhythms on their hoods. Elijah turned to look back at the station. No cameras, no reporters, just a room full of officers who'd witnessed something unforgettable. Not because it was explosive, but because it was authentic. The past had entered their building and asked for nothing except to be acknowledged, and now it was departing, carried by the same man who had kept it safe all these years. SUV doors closed, engines hummed into the night, and Greenwood, for the first time in ages, held its breath. Not from fear, but reverence. The road leading from Greenwood had never seemed lengthy to Elijah Brooks. He had driven it during quiet dawn hours and heavy summer evening heat. Now he sat in an unmarked black SUV's back seat as it glided past those same familiar oak trees, their branches drooping with age. Rain continued tapping gently against windows, though the storm had passed. Beside him, the metal container sat quietly, closed again, now in federal custody, but no longer shrouded in secrecy. Across from him sat Agent Monica Hughes, her eyes scanning a slim tablet filled with secure files, though occasionally she glanced at him, not with suspicion or curiosity, but something approaching reverence. She had encountered many operatives, throughout her career many men who had once moved through American history's shadow corridors, but none like him. None who had maintained their position for so long without requesting anything in return. The journey ended at a discreet federal facility outside Atlanta. Nothing imposing, no signs, just fencing and quiet guards who nodded without salutes. Elijah was escorted inside without restraints, no shouted commands, only respectful silence. They led him to a small briefing room where a folded flag hung in a case on the wall beside an aging photograph of a Cold War intelligence team. Blurry. Faces most now forgotten, but one unmistakably a younger version of him. In this space, he sat again across from Monica and several higher-ranking officials who asked no unnecessary questions. They reviewed the box's contents, verified documents, fingerprints, classified photographs and the Black device, an encrypted storage tool from another era built before USBs became commonplace. The briefing lasted hours, but Elijah said little. When it concluded, Monica offered him the room to rest. He declined. "I've rested enough. What matters has been accomplished." They didn't detain him. They didn't debrief him for days. His work was finished. And so they returned him home, not to generate headlines or hold press conferences, but to fulfill the quiet understanding that men like Elijah weren't meant for cameras. They were meant for keeping the country stitched together in its unseen corners. Back in Greenwood, the town had changed in ways too subtle for most to identify. The SUV had not returned with lights or sound. It simply pulled up to Sycamore Street's curb, let him out, and drove away. A few neighbors peered from windows. Some waved awkwardly. Elijah nodded in response. He carried no luggage, no boxes, just the weight he'd carried for so long finally lifted. Inside his home, everything remained as he'd left it. The porch light flickered as it always had. The chair creaked as he sat, still slightly damp from morning dew. He poured himself coffee, black, no sugar, and let steam rise into early sunlight. He watched the street, watched the world continue turning, and for the first time in a very long while, it didn't feel like it was turning without him. 3 days. Later, a government vehicle, not black this time but navy blue and much quieter, pulled into his driveway. A woman emerged, dressed in civilian clothes. She carried a small polished wooden box and nothing else. Elijah met her at the door. She didn't state her name, didn't need to. She handed him the box with both hands and with a quiet voice said only, "He wanted you to have this." Elijah nodded. Inside the house, he placed the box on the mantel above the fireplace beside the old photo of his son and the folded flag from years past. He opened it later when the house was quiet again. Inside was another folded flag, this one, much older, worn by time. Beneath it, a single letter hand-signed by a federal director, and beneath that, a photograph of a man in uniform. His name was Isaiah Murdoch, Elijah's closest friend during the Cold War operations, a man who had died, under orders that were never supposed to exist. The letter was simple. Your delivery made the truth possible. His name will not be forgotten, neither will yours. Elijah stared at the photograph for an extended time. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in over 40 years, but now it felt like saying it wouldn't break anything. In fact, it might heal something. Over. The following weeks, Greenwood returned to its rhythms. The diner reopened after plumbing repairs. The church choir resumed Easter practice. But for those who had seen the black SUVs or heard whispers in grocery store lines, things weren't quite the same. The young officer who had arrested him, David Thomas, began passing by Elijah's house more frequently. Not as patrol, but as a neighbor. Once he stopped to offer help with groceries. Elijah declined, but this time he smiled. The town didn't ask questions, and Elijah didn't offer answers, because the truth had already been delivered where it needed to be. He spent mornings on the porch as always, sipping coffee, his posture slightly straighter now. And sometimes, without realizing it, he would glance toward the box above the fireplace where the weight of memory had been exchanged for something lighter. Not closure, because some things never close, but peace, the kind that comes only when you've done what you promised, regardless of how long it takes. One Sunday, a small piece in the Greenwood paper mentioned a brief federal visit to the local station. No details were provided, no names mentioned. But those who read between the lines understood. And for those who didn't, it didn't matter. It wasn't their story to know. That's how Elijah preferred it. He hadn't returned for glory. He hadn't kept the box all those years to earn anyone's applause. He had done it because it was right, because Isaiah had looked him in the eyes with blood on his lips and asked him, "Promise me it won't be buried forever." And Elijah had said, "I swear it." That kind of promise doesn't exist on paper. It lives in the marrow. And now, finally, it had been honored. As the sun dipped below the tree line that evening, Elijah lit the fireplace for the first time that season. Wood crackled and spit softly, echoing through the small living room. He looked up at the box, then back to the flames, and leaned into the warmth. The world outside kept turning. The years kept passing. But inside that house, for the first time, in a very long while, everything was still, and for Elijah Brooks, stillness was enough.